The summer heat shimmered above the dusty streets of Cedar Creek, Arizona Territory. July 1885 had brought a relentless drought that scorched the valley and withered the surrounding ranchlands to a brittle brown. But inside the town hall, the atmosphere felt heavy, with something far more suffocating than the desert air. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Eleanor Marie Sullivan stood at the edge of the crowded room, her slender fingers nervously twisting the frayed hem of her shawl. At 34, she carried the weight of desperation in the shadows beneath her once vibrant green eyes and the premature streaks of silver in her dark hair. The simple gold band on her finger caught the harsh lamplight. She hadn't been able to bring herself to sell it, even though Richard had been gone for 11 months now. The auction block had been hastily erected at the front of the hall, a crude, wooden platform that seemed to diminish the dignity of everyone who approached it. Eleanor had come to town seeking work, nothing more. Her small homestead outside Cedar Creek barely provided shelter for her 3 children these days, and she'd run out of household items to sell or trade for the food and medicine they desperately needed. She should have turned away, should have continued her fruitless search for employment at the dressmaker's shop or the hotel, and returned to the dilapidated cabin where her children waited, hungry but hopeful that their mother would bring salvation. But something kept her rooted to the spot, a terrible fascination with the spectacle unfolding before her eyes on this sweltering Thursday morning. The auctioneer, a wiry man named Jeremiah Caldwell with a voice that grated like metal on stone, stepped onto the platform with exaggerated importance. His extravagant mustache twitched as he surveyed the gathered crowd with calculating eyes. "Citizens of Cedar Creek and surrounding territories," Caldwell announced, his voice bouncing off the wooden walls. "Today, we offer an exceptional opportunity for those seeking laborers during these challenging times. The county has authorized the indenturing of individuals unable to support themselves, a humane alternative to the poorhouse or worse." Eleanor felt bile rise in her throat as she watched a young man with a missing arm being auctioned to a mine owner for a pittance. The system was technically legal in the territory. Those facing destitution could be bound by contract to work for their basic needs. The practice was presented as charity, preventing starvation while providing labor to those who needed it. In reality, it was barely disguised servitude. The crowd pressed closer with each auction, men in dusty hats and women in practical calico dresses, evaluating human beings like livestock. Eleanor observed with mounting horror as families were separated, children sent to different households than their parents, bonds of blood severed by the fall of a gavel. As the afternoon wore on, Eleanor found herself moving closer to the front, her mind racing with a desperate plan that had been forming since she first entered the hall. Her children, James, who at 10 carried himself with the seriousness of a man, Emma, just 7 and already skilled with a needle, and little Thomas, barely 4 and fighting a fever that wouldn't break without medicine they couldn't afford. The doctor had been clear. Without proper treatment and nutrition, Thomas might not survive another month. Eleanor had sold everything of value they possessed. She'd begged for work until her pride was as threadbare as her shoes. There was nothing left to sell except herself. The thought had come to her during the darkest hours of the previous night, as she'd wiped Thomas's burning forehead with a damp cloth and listened to his labored breathing. If she could secure a position in a wealthy household, perhaps as a housekeeper or cook, she might negotiate to keep her children with her. It was a desperate gamble, but she had run out of alternatives. "Caldwell," she called out as the auctioneer prepared to close the proceedings. Her voice, stronger than she felt, silenced the murmuring crowd. "I wish to offer myself for contract." The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but the calculating gleam returned to his eyes quickly. Enough. A respectable widow voluntarily offering herself for indenture was unusual enough to create interest, and interest meant higher bids. "Well now," he drawled, gesturing for her to approach the platform. "This is an unexpected development. State your name and qualifications, ma'am." Eleanor climbed the 3 wooden steps with as much dignity as she could muster. Standing before the crowd, she forced herself to meet their curious stares without flinching. "My name is Eleanor Sullivan, widow of Richard Sullivan. I'm skilled in cooking, sewing, housekeeping, and basic nursing. I can read and write, keep accounts, and manage a household staff." She paused, gathering her courage for the most critical part. "I have 3 children who must remain with me. We come as a family or not at all." A murmur rippled through the audience. Taking on a woman was one thing, accepting 3 children as well was quite another. Caldwell frowned, clearly concerned that this stipulation would dampen bidding enthusiasm. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said quietly, leaning closer, "you might fare better if you're willing to negotiate on that point." Eleanor's spine stiffened. "My children stay with me. That is non-negotiable." Caldwell sighed, but turned back to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have Mrs. Eleanor Sullivan, a qualified housekeeper and cook, offering herself for a 2-year contract. She comes with 3 children who, I'm assured, are well-behaved and capable of light work appropriate to their ages. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now, back to the story. The crowd's response was tepid. A few men exchanged glances, calculating the cost of feeding 4 additional mouths against the value of their labor. Eleanor felt a cold dread settling in her stomach as the silence stretched uncomfortably. $1, called a voice from the back. The bid came from Harold Winters, owner of the local saloon, a man known for his cruel treatment of employees, and wandering hands when it came to female staff. Eleanor suppressed a shudder. $1 from Mr. Winters, Caldwell announced, disappointment evident in his tone. "Surely this fine woman is worth more than that." $2, offered Mrs. Pembroke, who ran the boarding house. The woman was stern but fair, yet her establishment was barely staying afloat. Eleanor knew she would be worked to exhaustion for minimal compensation. $3, countered Winters, his eyes traveling over Eleanor in a way that made her skin crawl. Eleanor fought to maintain her composure as the bidding stalled at $3. It was a pittance, not enough to guarantee proper care for Thomas or ensure that her children would be treated with dignity. Her gamble was failing. And worse, she might end up in a situation more dangerous than their current poverty. $50. The deep voice cut through the hall like a thunderclap. The crowd parted to reveal a tall figure standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the harsh afternoon sun. As he stepped into the light, Eleanor could make out a man. In his early 40s, his broad shoulders and confident stance marking him as someone accustomed to command. His clothes were trail-worn but of good quality, and the Colt revolver at his hip looked well used but meticulously maintained. $50, he repeated, walking toward the platform with the unhurried gait of a man who expected obstacles to remove themselves from his path. Caldwell's eyes widened at the unprecedented sum. $50 from Mr. Harrison, Jackson Harrison of the Diamondback Ranch. The name sent another ripple through the crowd. The Diamondback was the largest ranch in the territory, spanning thousands of acres north of Cedar Creek. Its owner was known to be fair but exacting, a man who had built his empire through relentless work and shrewd business sense. $50 from Mr. Harrison, Caldwell announced with newfound enthusiasm. Do I hear 55? The room fell silent. No one was willing to challenge Harrison's bid, especially not for a widow and 3 children. Eleanor studied the rancher's face, searching for signs of his intentions. His weathered features revealed little, but something in his dark eyes seemed vaguely familiar, stirring a memory she couldn't quite place. $50 going once, Caldwell called. Going twice. He paused dramatically, scanning the crowd for any last-minute competition. Sold to Mr. Jackson Harrison for $50. The gavel fell with a sharp crack that seemed to seal Eleanor's fate. She descended from the platform on shaking legs, approaching her new employer with a mixture of relief and trepidation. $50 meant medicine for Thomas. It meant food and shelter for all of them. But it also meant placing herself and her children entirely in the hands of a stranger. Harrison studied her with an intensity that made Eleanor straighten her spine and lift her chin. Whatever her circumstances, she would not surrender her dignity. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, his voice lower now that they stood face to face, "I understand you have children waiting for you?" "Yes, sir. They're at our cabin outside town. My youngest is ill and needed to rest." Something flickered across Harrison's face, concern perhaps, or recognition. "Then we should collect them immediately. My wagon is outside." As Eleanor signed the contract binding her to 2 years of service at the Diamondback Ranch, she felt the weight of every signature and initial. The terms were surprisingly generous. Specified working hours, proper accommodation for her family, education for the children, and medical care as needed. Still, she was effectively selling herself into servitude, regardless of how comfortably the document phrased it. The ride to her cabin was conducted in silence. Harrison handled the team of horses with confident ease while Eleanor sat beside him, her thoughts racing. What kind of man paid $50 for a housekeeper? The sum was extravagant, raising questions about his true intentions that she dared not voice. Her cabin appeared on the horizon, a small listing structure that had once held such promise. When she and Richard had claimed their homestead 5 years earlier, dreams of a prosperous farm had withered along with their crops during the prolonged drought, and Richard's death from pneumonia had left Eleanor alone to face mounting debts and dwindling resources. As the wagon drew closer, the door of the cabin burst open. James appeared first, his young face serious as he evaluated the approaching vehicle and the stranger accompanying his mother. Emma followed, holding little Thomas in her arms, the boy's face flushed with fever. "Mama!" Emma called, relief evident in her voice. "Thomas is worse. His fever's higher." Eleanor jumped from the wagon before it fully stopped, rushing to examine her youngest. His skin burned against her palm, and his breathing had grown more labored. Fear clutched at her heart. "Mrs. Sullivan," Harrison said suddenly at her shoulder, "may I?" He reached for the child with surprising gentleness. After a moment's hesitation, Eleanor nodded. Harrison carefully took Thomas from Emma's arms, examining him with a professional eye. "Pneumonia," he said grimly, "similar to what my foreman's boy had last month. We need to get him to the ranch. My housekeeper knows treatments that the doctor in town hasn't heard of." Within minutes, they had gathered the Sullivan family's meager belongings: clothing, a few books, the quilt Eleanor had made for her wedding, and Richard's pocket watch, the last tangible connection to the man she had loved. Harrison helped them into the wagon with a courtesy that surprised Eleanor, securing Thomas on a makeshift bed of blankets where she could tend to him during the journey. As they pulled away from the cabin that had been both home and prison for the past year, Eleanor felt a complicated mix of grief and hope. She was leaving behind the last physical connection to her life with Richard, but she was also leaving behind the hunger and helplessness that had become their daily companions. The journey to the Diamondback Ranch took nearly 3 hours, with Harrison pushing the horses at a pace that balanced speed with safety, As they traveled, the landscape gradually transformed from the parched flatlands near Cedar Creek to rolling hills dotted with grazing cattle. A creek, actually flowing with water to the Sullivan children's amazement, wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwoods and willows that offered blessed shade. The ranch house appeared as they crested a final hill, a sprawling, two-story structure built of local stone and timber, with wide verandas and numerous outbuildings. Unlike most of the territory's utilitarian ranch houses, this one had been constructed with an eye toward beauty as well as function, its proportions pleasing and its details thoughtfully executed. "It's like a castle," Emma whispered, her eyes wide. Harrison's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Hardly that, but it's home." As the wagon approached, the front door opened to reveal an older woman in a crisp apron, her silver hair pulled back in a practical bun. She hurried down the steps as Harrison brought the wagon to a halt. "Mrs. Abernathy," Harrison called, "we have a sick child who needs your attention and a family who'll be joining the household." The housekeeper's efficient demeanor reminded Eleanor of her own grandmother. Practical, no nonsense, but with kindness lurking beneath the brisk exterior. Mrs. Abernathy barely blinked at the unexpected arrivals, immediately taking charge of Thomas with confident hands. "Pneumonia by the look of him," she said, confirming Harrison's diagnosis. "Bring him to the blue room, Mr. Harrison. I'll need hot water, my herb chest, and fresh linens." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Thomas was settled in a bright, airy bedroom that seemed palatial compared to the cramped cabin they'd left behind. Mrs. Abernathy applied poultices to his chest and administered herbal teas that smelled strongly of mint and other plants Eleanor couldn't identify. By nightfall, his breathing had eased slightly, and his fever had dropped enough that he could sleep peacefully. While Eleanor remained at Thomas's bedside, Harrison had settled James and Emma in adjacent rooms, provided them with clean clothing that had belonged to his foreman's children, and ensured they were fed a hearty meal. His consideration extended beyond what was required by their contract, leaving Eleanor increasingly puzzled by his motivations. It was nearly midnight when Mrs. Abernathy insisted on taking over Thomas's care, ordering Eleanor to get some rest. "The child will need you strong tomorrow," she said firmly. "There's food kept warm for you in the kitchen, and Mr. Harrison would like a word when you're ready." Eleanor found Harrison in his study, a comfortable room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large desk covered with ledgers and correspondence. He stood as she entered, gesturing to a chair across from his own. "How is your son?" he asked, genuine concern evident in his voice. "Better, thanks to Mrs. Abernathy. I can't express my gratitude adequately." Harrison nodded, studying her with that same intensity she'd noticed at the auction. "Mrs. Sullivan, I realize you must have questions about today's events." Eleanor met his gaze directly. "Yes, sir. I'm grateful for your intervention and your generosity toward my children, but I don't understand why you would pay such a sum for a housekeeper, especially one encumbered with 3 children." Something shifted in Harrison's expression. Softening around the eyes, perhaps, or a slight relaxing of his jaw. "You don't remember me, do you?" Eleanor frowned, studying his face more carefully. There was something familiar in the set of his mouth, the angle of his cheekbones, but she couldn't place him. "Should I, Mr. Harrison?" He leaned forward slightly. "Millbrook, Ohio. Winter of 1865, a frozen river and a very foolish 9-year-old girl who thought the ice would hold her weight." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat as the memory crystallized, the terrifying crack of ice giving way beneath her feet, the shocking cold of the water closing over her head, the certainty that she was going to die. And then strong hands gripping her coat, hauling her back to the surface, a teenage boy's face tight with effort as he dragged her to safety. "You," she whispered, You pulled me from Miller's Creek, but your name wasn't Harrison then." "Jackson Miller," he confirmed. "I took my mother's maiden name when I came west. Easier to make a fresh start that way." Eleanor struggled to reconcile the gangly teenager from her childhood with the imposing man before her. "You saved my life, and you're saving mine now," in a manner of speaking. At her confused look, he continued, "This ranch has grown beyond what one man can effectively manage. I need competent help with the household so I can focus on expanding the operation. When I saw you on that auction block, I recognized you immediately. You have your mother's eyes and your father's stubborn chin." His expression softened further. "I couldn't leave Richard Sullivan's widow to the mercies of Harold Winters or a failing boarding house." "You knew my husband?" Harrison nodded. "We never met, but I make it my business to know what happens in and around my territory. When he died, I considered offering assistance, but he hesitated. "I wasn't sure my help would be welcome. You Sullivans have always been proud, and accepting charity isn't in your nature." Eleanor absorbed this information slowly, her exhausted mind struggling to make sense of the strange turns her life had taken in a single day. This man, this stranger, who wasn't entirely a stranger, had been watching over her family from a distance, stepping in only when her desperation had reached its peak. "The contract," she said suddenly, "is it real? Do you actually need a housekeeper?" Harrison's laugh was unexpected, a rich sound that transformed his serious face. "Mrs. Sullivan, have you seen the state of this house? Mrs. Abernathy is an excellent cook and nurse, but she's 73 and can't manage the entire household alone. The last 3 housekeepers I hired left within a month, 2 because they couldn't stand the isolation, and 1 because my foreman's son put a rattlesnake in her bedroom as a prank." He sobered. "The contract is genuine. I need your help, and you need a fresh start." It seemed a fair exchange. Eleanor considered his words carefully. "And my children?" The contract mentioned education. "There's a schoolroom on the 2nd floor, currently gathering dust. My sister was a teacher before she married and moved to San Francisco. She left her books and materials behind. I had planned to hire a tutor eventually, but perhaps you might take on that role as well, for your children and for the Hand's children who live on the property." The offer was so far beyond what Eleanor had dared to hope for that she found herself momentarily speechless. A secure position, education for her children, proper medical care for Thomas. It was everything she had prayed for during those long, desperate nights. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why go to such lengths for someone you barely knew 20 years ago?" Harrison was quiet for a long moment, his gaze shifting to the window where stars punctuated the vast Arizona night. "Because someone did the same for me once," he said finally. "When I came west, I had nothing but the clothes on my back, and more arrogance than sense. An old rancher named Buchanan took a chance on me, taught me the business, eventually left me this land when he died childless." He looked back at Eleanor. "I'm merely passing on the kindness that was shown to me." As Eleanor made her way back to Thomas's room, her mind whirled with the day's revelations. The desperate gamble she had taken by offering herself at auction had led not to further degradation, but to an unexpected salvation. Her children would be safe, Thomas would recover, and she would work for a man who, whatever his other qualities might be, had once cared enough to save a foolish girl from drowning. Morning brought new clarity as sunlight streamed through windows far larger than any in their former cabin. Thomas's fever had broken during the night, and though he remained weak, his breathing was significantly improved. Mrs. Abernathy's herbal remedies had accomplished what the town doctor's expensive medicines had failed to do. James and Emma had already risen, their natural resilience allowing them to adapt quickly to their changed circumstances. Eleanor found them in the kitchen, helping Mrs. Abernathy prepare breakfast, their initial shyness already giving way to cautious enthusiasm about their new home. "Mama!" Emma called upon seeing Eleanor. "Mrs. Abernathy says I can help with the baking if I wash my hands properly, and James is learning to collect eggs without getting pecked." The simple joy in her daughter's voice brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. How long had it been since her children had experienced ordinary childhood pleasures instead of premature responsibility? "Mr. Harrison wants to show us the ranch after breakfast," James added, his serious face brightening with anticipation. "He says there are horses we might learn to ride once we're settled." Eleanor smiled at her son's excitement, recognizing how desperately he needed male guidance at this age. Whether by design or coincidence, Harrison seemed to understand exactly what her family required to heal from the hardships they had endured. Breakfast was a revelation. Fresh eggs, bacon, biscuits still warm from the oven, preserves made from fruit grown in the ranch's own orchard. The Sullivan family ate with the grateful appreciation of those who had known true hunger, while Harrison and Mrs. Abernathy tactfully avoided commenting on their obvious relief at seeing abundant food. Afterward, Harrison suggested a tour of the property, but Eleanor hesitated, glancing toward the stairs that led to Thomas's room. "Mrs. Abernathy will stay with him," Harrison assured her. "You and the older children should understand the layout of your new home." The Diamondback Ranch proved to be even more impressive in daylight. Beyond the main house lay a complex of buildings that supported the cattle operation. Bunkhouses for the ranch hands, a cookhouse where they took their meals, barns, stables, workshops, and storehouses, a vegetator garden, larger than the Sullivans' entire former property, supplied the household with fresh produce, and an orchard of apple and peach trees promised future harvests. As they walked, Harrison explained the workings of the ranch with the patience of a natural teacher. James absorbed every detail with serious attention, while Emma was captivated by the chickens, goats, and domestic animals that populated the barnyard. "Your son has a good mind for details," Harrison observed, as James ran ahead to examine the blacksmith's forge more closely. "He'd make an excellent ranch manager someday, with the right education." Eleanor glanced at him sharply. "You're speaking as though our arrangement extends beyond the 2 years in our contract." Harrison met her gaze steadily. "I believe in planning for all possibilities, Mrs. Sullivan. If our arrangement proves satisfactory to both parties, I see no reason why it couldn't continue indefinitely." Something in his tone made Eleanor wonder if he was speaking purely of employment, but she pushed the thought aside as premature. They had known each other, or rather re-encountered each other, for less than a day. Whatever might develop between them would require time and trust that had yet to be established. Their tour concluded at the schoolroom, a bright space with large windows and bookshelves filled with volumes that made Eleanor's heart race with excitement. As a girl, she had dreamed of becoming a teacher before marriage, and motherhood had redirected her path. The opportunity to educate not only her own children but others on the ranch represented an unexpected chance to reclaim that abandoned aspiration. "This is perfect," she breathed, running her fingers along the spines of readers, mathematics texts, and histories. "When can I begin?" Harrison's smile transformed his stern features. "As soon as Thomas is well enough for you to spare the time. There are 8 children on the ranch besides your own, ranging from 5 to 14. They've had sporadic schooling at best." Over the next few weeks, the Sullivan family settled into life at the Diamondback with increasing ease. Thomas recovered, fully, his natural vitality returning as he gained weight and strength. James and Emma blossomed under the combination of security, proper nutrition, and meaningful work, appropriate to their ages. Eleanor established a routine that balanced her household responsibilities with teaching duties, finding satisfaction in both roles. Harrison proved to be a fair employer, neither demanding nor indulgent. He maintained appropriate professional distance while showing genuine interest in the children's progress and Eleanor's adaptation to ranch life. If sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression that suggested more personal interest, he never acted inappropriately or pressured her in any way. The ranch hands and their families accepted the Sullivans with the matter-of-fact inclusiveness of people accustomed to judging others by their work rather than their circumstances. No one mentioned the auction or asked invasive questions about their past. In the unwritten code of the frontier, what mattered was a person's conduct in the present, not the events that had led them there. As autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures and the annual cattle drive to market, Eleanor found herself settled into a life far removed from the desperate circumstances she had faced just months earlier. The haunted look had disappeared from James's eyes, replaced by the healthy confidence of a boy learning useful skills from men who treated him with respect. Emma's natural cheerfulness had returned in full force, and Thomas had grown so robust that it was difficult to remember how close to death he had been. And Eleanor herself, she had changed as well, regaining weight lost during their months of near starvation, finding purpose in her teaching and household management, rediscovering simple pleasures like reading in the evening or walking by the creek in the cool of early morning. If sometimes she found herself wondering about the nature of her relationship with Jackson Harrison, whether it might eventually evolve beyond employer and employee, she kept such thoughts private, focusing instead on the present blessings. One evening in late September, as Eleanor sat on the veranda enjoying the sunset after a long day of teaching and preserving the garden's final harvest, Harrison joined her with 2 cups of coffee. They had fallen into the habit of these twilight conversations, discussing the children's progress, ranch operations, or books they had both read. "You've transformed this place," Harrison said after they had sat in companionable silence for several minutes. "I hardly recognize my own home." Eleanor smiled, accepting the compliment with a nod. Under her direction, the house had indeed changed. Curtains now hung at windows that had been bare for years, fresh flowers appeared on tables, and meals had become communal events rather than functional necessities. "The children are thriving," she responded. "James talks of nothing but cattle and horses now. I think he's found his calling." Harrison nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've been meaning to discuss something with you. The cattle drive leaves next week. I usually go with the men, but this year—" he hesitated. "This year I'm considering staying behind. The foreman can handle things without me." Eleanor tried to ignore the flutter of awareness his words created. "Oh? Is there some problem requiring your attention here?" "Not a problem. An opportunity." He set his coffee cup aside, turning to face her more directly. "Mrs. Sullivan, Eleanor, these past months have shown me what's been missing from the Diamondback. Not just efficient management or proper schooling for the children, but a sense of home, the kind of place people want to return to at day's end." The use of her given name, so carefully avoided until now, signaled a shift in their relationship that both thrilled and terrified Eleanor. "Mr. Harrison—" "Jackson," he corrected gently. "After all this time, I think we can dispense with formalities, at least in private." Eleanor gathered her courage, asking the question that had lingered unspoken between them. "Why did you really bid on me that day? The truth, please." Jackson considered her question with the seriousness it deserved. "I recognized you immediately," he admitted. The same determined chin, the same direct gaze that had thanked me after I pulled you from the creek all those years ago. When I heard about your husband's death and your struggles afterward, I wanted to help, but I knew you wouldn't accept charity. So you created an employment opportunity instead. Yes, though I genuinely needed a housekeeper, what I didn't anticipate was how quickly you and your children would become essential to this place and to me. He met her gaze directly. "I've been alone a long time, Eleanor. I thought it was enough building this ranch, accumulating wealth and land. But watching you with your children, seeing the life you've brought to this house, it's made me reconsider what truly matters." Eleanor's heart raced at the implication of his words. "What are you saying, Jackson?" "I'm saying that our current arrangement has an expiration date. In 14 months your contract ends and you'd be free to take your children elsewhere." He took a deep breath. "I'm saying I don't want that to happen. I'm saying I've grown to care for you and your children far beyond what's appropriate for an employer." The directness of his declaration left Eleanor momentarily speechless. She had suspected his feelings might be developing along such lines, had even acknowledged her own growing attachment to this serious, honorable man who had saved her twice now, once from drowning and once from destitution. But hearing the words spoken aloud made them real in a way that private thoughts could not match. "Jackson," she began carefully, "I won't pretend I haven't developed feelings for you as well. But my children must come first in any decision I make." His smile was warm with understanding. "I would expect nothing less, and I hope you know that I've come to care deeply for them too. James with his serious questions and quiet strength, Emma with her boundless enthusiasm, even Thomas with his mischief now that he's well." Eleanor studied his face in the fading light, seeing not just the successful rancher, but the teenage boy who had risked his own life to save hers so many years ago. The connection between them had its roots in that long-ago winter day, but it had grown into something deeper through their shared experiences over recent months. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked, needing absolute clarity before she could consider his offer. Jackson reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I'm proposing that when your contract ends next year, we replace it with a different kind of contract entirely, one that makes you not my employee, but my partner in every sense. I'm proposing marriage, Eleanor, if you think you could consider me as a husband and a father to your children." The unexpectedness of his directness startled a laugh from her. "You're not one for long courtships, are you?" His answering smile held a hint of self-deprecation. "At our age, with all we've seen of life's uncertainty, lengthy courtships seem an unnecessary luxury. I know what I want, Eleanor. I want you and your children to remain here permanently, not as employees, but as family." Eleanor's mind raced, considering implications and possibilities. Marriage to Jackson would secure her children's future beyond anything she could provide alone. James would learn ranching from one of the territory's most successful cattlemen. Emma and Thomas would grow up with every advantage of education and opportunity, and Eleanor herself would never again face the bone-deep terror of watching her children go hungry. But beyond these practical considerations lay more personal ones. She had loved Richard deeply, had mourned him sincerely, but he had been gone nearly 2 years now. The heart, she was discovering, had a capacity for renewal that sometimes surprised its owner. Her feelings for Jackson were different, less the passionate attachment of youth and more the steady appreciation of maturity, but no less genuine for that difference. "I need time," she said finally. "Not a year, but some time to be certain, for both our sakes and for the children." Jackson's relief was evident in the relaxing of his shoulders. He had expected outright rejection, she realized, and was grateful even for her qualified response. "Take whatever time you need," he said, raising her hand to his lips in a gesture of respect. "I've waited 20 years to find you again. I can wait a little longer for your answer." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Eleanor felt a profound sense of possibility unfurling before her. From the desperate woman who had climbed onto an auction block just months ago, she had transformed into someone with choices, with agency, with hope for a future brighter than any she had dared imagine during those dark days after Richard's death. The journey ahead would require courage and faith, the courage to open her heart again, the faith to believe in second chances. But as Jackson's hand held hers in the gathering twilight, Eleanor found both qualities stirring within her soul. Her desperate gamble had led not to further degradation, but to unexpected redemption, proving once again that even in the darkest moments, light could find its way through. As if sensing her thoughts, Jackson spoke quietly. "You know, when I pulled you from that creek all those years ago, my grandfather told me something I've never forgotten. He said, 'Sometimes the people we save are really saving us.' I didn't understand his meaning then, but I do now." Eleanor turned to him, curious. "And what did he mean?" Jackson's eyes held hers with warmth and certainty. "That true salvation isn't a one-way transaction. It's a circle completed when those we help bring new purpose to our lives. Your courage in offering yourself at that auction to save your children. It awakened something in me that had been dormant for too long. You saved me from a lifetime of solitude and emptiness, Eleanor. Whatever you decide about our future, I'll always be grateful for that gift." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Eleanor felt the truth of his words resonate within her. From the deepest desperation had come unexpected hope. From public humiliation had come private dignity. From a mother's sacrifice had come not just her children's salvation, but the promise of a love she had never anticipated finding again. The journey wasn't over. There would be challenges ahead, adjustments for the children, the inevitable complications of blending lives long, accustomed to independence. But for the first time since Richard's death, Eleanor could look toward the future with something more powerful than mere determination. She could look ahead with genuine hope, with the quiet certainty that sometimes life's most desperate gambles led to its most precious rewards. The weeks following Jackson's proposal brought a subtle shift in the dynamics at Diamondback Ranch. Though nothing had been formally announced, the ranch hands exchanged knowing glances when they saw Eleanor and Jackson walking together in the evenings. Mrs. Abernathy hummed wedding songs while kneading bread, pretending innocence when Eleanor raised an eyebrow at her. Even the children seemed to sense the change. James spent more time shadowing Jackson, absorbing ranching knowledge with increased determination, while Emma took special care arranging wildflowers on the dinner table whenever Jackson joined them for meals. October arrived with the return of the cattle drive, bringing both prosperity and complications. The foreman, Caleb Mitchell, had managed the operation successfully in Jackson's absence, but he brought troubling news along with the profits. "Whitaker's been buying up water rights all along the eastern boundary," Mitchell reported during a private meeting in Jackson's study. "Word is he's trying to force the smaller ranchers to sell out." Eleanor, who had been reviewing the household accounts nearby, caught Jackson's troubled expression before he smoothed it away. Later that evening, as they sat on the veranda watching the sunset, she broached the subject carefully. "This Whitaker, is he a serious threat to Diamondback?" Jackson's surprise at her directness quickly gave way to appreciation. Unlike most women of her era, Eleanor had never shied away from difficult realities. It was one of the qualities he most admired in her. "Victor Whitaker represents a new breed of cattleman," he explained. "Eastern money, political connections, and few scruples about how he expands his holdings. He's been systematically acquiring ranches throughout the territory, sometimes through legitimate purchases, sometimes through more questionable methods, such as controlling water access," Eleanor surmised. Jackson nodded. "Water is life out here. If Whitaker controls the streams that feed our eastern pastures, he can effectively render that land worthless, and then offer to buy it at a fraction of its value." "Exactly," Jackson studied her profile in the fading light. "You understand these matters quickly." Eleanor smiled faintly. "I grew up watching my father negotiate with wool merchants who tried similar tactics with sheep farmers. The resources may be different, but the strategies of powerful men rarely change." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of James, who approached with the careful dignity of a boy determined to be taken seriously. At 10, he had grown an inch since coming to the ranch and had developed the lean, wiry build of someone who worked alongside men and was proud of his contributions. "Mr. Harrison," he said formally, "Mr. Mitchell said you wanted to see the new foal." Jackson's expression softened. "Indeed I did. Your mother and I were just discussing ranch business, but I think a visit to the stables would be a welcome break. Would you care to join us, Eleanor?" The three walked together toward the stables, James positioning himself between the adults with unconscious symbolism. The boy had been gradually warming to Jackson, moving from wary acceptance to genuine respect, but he maintained a careful distance that Eleanor recognized as self-protection. James had already lost one father. He was cautious about allowing himself to become attached to another potential father figure who might also disappear. The foal was a beautiful bay with a white star on his forehead, his spindly legs already showing the promise of strength and speed. As James expertly approached the nervous animal, using the techniques Jackson had taught him, Eleanor watched the interaction between man and boy with growing certainty about the decision she was approaching. "He has a gift with horses," Jackson observed quietly, standing close enough that only she could hear. "Mitchell says he's never seen a boy his age with such natural ability." Pride warmed Eleanor's heart. His father would be pleased. Richard loved horses, though we could never afford more than our old plow horse. Jackson's expression remained carefully neutral at the mention of her late husband. He had never shown jealousy or resentment about Richard's place in the Sullivan family's history, another quality that Eleanor had come to value deeply. "James would make an excellent horse trainer with proper education and opportunity," Jackson said. "The Diamondback could use someone with that specialty as we expand our breeding program." The implicit promise in his words that James would have a place at the ranch regardless of Eleanor's decision about marriage touched her deeply. Jackson was offering her son a future based on his own merits, not merely as an extension of potential step-family obligations. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Eleanor sat at her bedroom window, contemplating the moonlit landscape of the ranch that had become home in ways she had never anticipated. The question that had been forming in her mind for weeks had crystallized during their evening at the stables. Was she considering Jackson's proposal because of the security it offered her children, or because of genuine affection for the man himself? The distinction mattered. Her children deserved a stepfather who was loved for himself, not merely tolerated for his resources, and Jackson deserved a wife who cherished him as a husband, not merely appreciated him as a provider. Eleanor's reflections were interrupted by a soft knock at her door. Opening it, she found Emma standing in her nightgown, her face troubled in the lamplight. "What is it, sweetheart?" Eleanor asked, drawing her daughter into the room. Emma sat on the edge of the bed, her 7-year-old face serious. "Is Mr. Harrison going to be our new papa?" The directness of the question momentarily startled Eleanor. She had been careful not to discuss Jackson's proposal with the children, wanting to be certain of her own feelings before introducing the possibility of such a significant change in their lives. "What makes you ask that?" she countered gently. Emma shrugged with the artless honesty of childhood. "You look at him the way Mrs. Mitchell looks at Mr. Mitchell, and he looks at you the way Papa used to look at you, like you're something special. He wants to keep safe." Eleanor sat beside her daughter, struck by the perceptiveness of children who observed far more than adults often credited. Would it upset you if Mr. Harrison became part of our family? Emma considered the question with surprising thoughtfulness. He's nice. He doesn't yell like the winter's man in town, and he listens when I talk about my drawings. He taught Thomas how to whistle, and he doesn't laugh when James asks questions about ranching. She paused, then added with childlike practicality, and we wouldn't have to leave the ranch. I like it here. Is that important to you, staying here? Emma nodded emphatically. In town, people looked at us like we were broken things. Here, nobody cares that Papa died or that we didn't have money. Mrs. Abernathy says I'm the best egg collector she's ever had, and Mr. Mitchell said James is a natural horseman, and Thomas makes everyone laugh with his stories. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And you smile again, Mamma. You didn't smile much after Papa died. Eleanor gathered her daughter into a tight embrace, momentarily unable to speak, past the lump in her throat. Out of the mouths of babes came the clearest wisdom. Her children had been watching her grief as carefully as she had been watching their adjustment, measuring her happiness against their memories of better times. I loved your father very much, she said when she could trust her voice again. Nothing will ever change that, but you're right that I'm happier now than I was after he died. Part of that is because you children are thriving here, and part is because of Mr. Harrison's kindness. Then why don't you marry him? Emma asked with the straightforward logic of childhood. Then we could all stay together and be happy. As Eleanor tucked Emma back into bed, promising to consider her daughter's advice carefully, she found herself smiling at the simplicity with which children approached complex adult decisions. From Emma's perspective, the choice was clear. Happiness should be embraced when found, especially after experiencing its absence. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to the Diamondback. Eleanor was overseeing the schoolroom, helping the children with their arithmetic lessons, when Mrs. Abernathy appeared at the door with an unusually formal expression. Mrs. Sullivan, there's a gentleman asking to see you. Says he's your brother-in-law. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. Matthew Sullivan, Richard's younger brother, had made his position painfully clear after Richard's death. He had offered to take the boys, James and Thomas, to raise on his farm in California, but had expressed no interest in Emma or Eleanor herself. The clear implication had been that the males of the family were worth salvaging, while the females were expendable. Eleanor had refused his selective charity outright, preferring to keep her family intact despite their dire circumstances. Please tell Mr. Sullivan I'll be with him shortly, she said, maintaining her composure for the children's sake. James, would you continue leading the younger students through their multiplication tables? Her son nodded, clearly recognizing the name and its significance. His expression had closed off, becoming the guarded mask he had worn during their hardest times after Richard's death. Eleanor found Matthew Sullivan in the main parlor, looking distinctly uncomfortable amid the tasteful furnishings she had arranged over the past months. He was a smaller, paler version of Richard, with the same Sullivan jaw, but none of the warmth that had animated her husband's features. Matthew, she said coolly, remaining standing rather than inviting him to sit. This is an unexpected visit, Eleanor. He nodded stiffly. I've come on family business. I was in Phoenix on other matters and heard rumors about your situation here. The way he emphasized situation made it clear that those rumors had not painted a flattering picture. Eleanor felt a flash of anger at the implied judgment, but kept her voice level. The children and I are doing very well. Thank you for your concern. James and Thomas are healthy and receiving proper education, as is Emma. Matthew's expression tightened at the mention of his niece, whom he had so easily dismissed from his concept of family responsibility. That's not what I heard. Word in Cedar Creek is that you sold yourself at public auction to a rancher of questionable reputation. The crude mischaracterization was clearly designed to wound, and Eleanor felt its sting, despite her determination to remain dignified. I entered into a legal employment contract that has provided security and opportunity for my children after you refused to help us unless I agreed to separate my family. And now you're planning to marry this rancher, to allow a stranger to raise Richard's sons. Mr. Harrison is hardly a stranger to us now, and his offer of marriage is motivated by genuine affection, not merely convenience. Eleanor straightened her spine, meeting her brother-in-law's accusatory gaze directly. Not that my personal arrangements are any of your concern, Matthew. You relinquished any right to an opinion about my children's welfare when you made it clear that only the boys mattered to you. Matthew flushed, his hands clenching at his sides. I have a duty to my brother's memory. Richard would never have wanted his sons raised by another man, especially not some upstart rancher with a dubious past. Dubious past? Eleanor frowned. What are you implying? Your Mr. Harrison isn't what he seems, Eleanor. Before coming to Arizona, he was involved in some highly questionable business dealings in Nevada. There are those who say he acquired the initial funds for this ranch through fraud or worse. Eleanor's immediate instinct was to dismiss Matthew's accusations as spite, but something in his expression, a certainty that went beyond mere malice, gave her pause. She had known Jackson for months now, had come to trust his character and integrity, but she knew little about his life before Arizona, beyond the brief connection they had shared in childhood. I think you should leave, Matthew, she said firmly. Whatever your intentions in coming here, they clearly weren't motivated by genuine concern for the children's welfare. I came to offer you another option, he countered. My situation has improved since we last spoke. I'm prepared to take all 3 children now, including Emma. You could have visiting rights, of course. The generous expansion of his offer to include her daughter did nothing to soften its fundamental insult. Matthew was still proposing to separate Eleanor from her children, merely adjusting the terms to appear more reasonable. The answer is the same as it was 2 years ago, Eleanor replied, her voice like steel. My children stay with me. We're a family, Matthew, something you seem incapable of understanding. Their conversation was interrupted by Jackson's arrival. He entered the room with the quiet authority that characterized his movements on the ranch, his expression carefully neutral as he assessed the tension between Eleanor and her visitor. Eleanor, he said, his use of her given name a deliberate statement of their relationship's nature. Is everything all right? Before she could respond, Matthew stepped forward, his posture aggressively confrontational despite his smaller stature. Sullivan, Matthew Sullivan. I'm Richard's brother and these children's uncle, and you're the man who thinks he can buy my brother's family. Jackson's expression didn't change, but Eleanor saw the slight tightening around his eyes that indicated controlled anger. Mr. Sullivan, I understand family concern, but I suggest you moderate your tone in my home, particularly when speaking to Mrs. Sullivan. Your home? Matthew scoffed. This is where you've installed my brother's widow in some mockery of respectability? Tell me, Harrison, does she know about your activities in Virginia City? About the mining shares you manipulated? Jackson's face remained impassive, but Eleanor saw something flicker in his eyes. Not guilt, exactly, but a shadow of old pain. Mr. Sullivan, I think it's time you left. Whatever your purpose in coming here, it's clearly not constructive. I'm not leaving without assurances about my nephew's welfare. Matthew turned to Eleanor. Think carefully about your children's future, Eleanor. A respectable life with blood relatives, or this arrangement with a man whose past won't bear close examination. After Matthew's departure, an uncomfortable silence settled between Eleanor and Jackson. They stood in the parlor, the physical distance between them suddenly mirroring an emotional uncertainty that hadn't existed that morning. I owe you an explanation, Jackson said finally. Eleanor studied his face, searching for signs of deception, but finding only regret and resolution. "About Virginia City." He nodded, gesturing for her to sit while remaining standing himself, as if preparing to accept judgment. "Before coming to Arizona, I was involved in silver mining investments in Nevada. I was young, ambitious, and more concerned with success than how it was achieved." Matthew implied fraud. Not fraud exactly, but not complete honesty either. "I had information about a particular mine's productivity that wasn't publicly available. I used that knowledge to acquire shares before their value increased." Jackson met her gaze directly. "It wasn't illegal, but it wasn't ethical by the standards I live by now." Eleanor absorbed this information carefully. The man before her had never presented himself as perfect, merely as someone who had learned from his mistakes and tried to live honorably in the present. "And the money that started this ranch?" "Came partly from those investments, yes. But I've spent the past 15 years trying to ensure that the Diamondback's success is built on honest work and fair dealings." He paused. "I should have told you this myself, long before your brother-in-law could use it as a weapon." The honesty of his admission eased some of Eleanor's concern, but raised new questions about the man she was considering marrying. "What else don't I know about you, Jackson?" He considered her question with the seriousness it deserved. "I've never killed a man, though I've been in situations where it might have been justified. I've never cheated a business partner or broken a contract. I drink occasionally, but not to excess. I've had relationships with women in the past, but none that approached marriage." He hesitated. "And I've spent most of my adult life trying to make amends for the shortcuts I took when I was younger and more foolish." "By building this ranch?" "By building something worthwhile, yes, something that creates opportunities for others rather than merely wealth for myself." He gestured toward the window where they could see ranch hands working with cattle in the distance. 23 families depend on the Diamondback for their livelihood. That responsibility weighs on me daily." Eleanor weighed his words against her knowledge of the man himself, his fairness with employees, his patience with her children, his consistent honesty in their daily interactions. The questionable business dealings had occurred long before. She knew him, and he had made no attempt to deny or minimize them when confronted. "Thank you for your honesty," she said finally. "I appreciate that you didn't try to dismiss Matthew's accusations outright." Jackson's relief was visible in the slight relaxation of his shoulders. "I've been planning to tell you about that chapter of my life. I just wanted to establish trust between us first, perhaps a miscalculation on my part." The acknowledgement of his error in judgment somehow made him more human, more accessible than the image of flawless protector he sometimes projected. Eleanor found herself appreciating his vulnerability as much as his strength. "We all have chapters in our past that we're not proud of," she said softly. "What matters is how we write the current chapter." His smile was tentative but genuine. "And our future chapters. Do you still see the possibility of writing those together?" Eleanor thought of Emma's straightforward wisdom the night before, of James's growing confidence under Jackson's guidance, of Thomas's recovery from illness that might have claimed his life without the resources of the Diamondback. She thought of her own transformation from desperate widow to respected teacher and potential ranch mistress. "Matthew's visit changes nothing about my feelings," she said with quiet certainty. "If anything, it clarifies them. He offered what he considered a generous alternative, and I realized I couldn't imagine separating my children from this place, or myself from you." Jackson moved closer, taking her hands in his with a gentleness that belied his strength. "Eleanor Sullivan, are you accepting my proposal?" She met his gaze steadily. "I believe I am, Mr. Harrison. though there are practical matters we should discuss first." His smile broadened. "Such as? The children's legal status, for one. I want them to have your name, but also legal protection of their inheritance. Rights, Emma especially. Girls are too often overlooked in such arrangements." Jackson nodded, unsurprised by her practical approach to even this emotional moment. "I'll speak with Judge Hollister about formal adoption papers that explicitly include all 3 children with equal standing. Would that address your concern?" "It would." Eleanor hesitated, then added, "And I'd like to continue teaching, not just our children, but the others on the ranch as well. I've discovered I have a talent for it, and it brings me satisfaction beyond household management." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Jackson assured her. "Your work with the children has transformed this community. Several hands who were considering moving on have decided to stay because their children are receiving education they couldn't get elsewhere." Their discussion of practical arrangements, when to hold the ceremony, how to announce their decision to the children, what adjustments might be needed to the main house, flowed naturally from the emotional commitment they had just made. Eleanor found herself appreciating anew this quality they shared, the ability to blend practical considerations with deeper feelings, neither sacrificing romance for pragmatism nor ignoring necessary details in favor of sentiment. That evening, they gathered the children in the parlor to share their decision. James, Emma, and Thomas sat together on the sofa, their expressions ranging from Emma's barely contained excitement to James's careful neutrality and Thomas's simple curiosity. "We have something important to discuss with you," Eleanor began, sitting across from her children with Jackson beside her. "Mr. Harrison has asked me to marry him, and I've accepted his proposal." Emma's face broke into a delighted smile, while Thomas looked thoughtfully between the adults. James, however, remained expressionless, his eyes fixed on a point just past Jackson's shoulder. "What this means," Eleanor continued, "is that we would stay here at the Diamondback permanently. Mr. Harrison would legally adopt all 3 of you, giving you his name and making you his heirs, along with any children we might have together in the future." "Would we have to call you father?" James asked, addressing Jackson directly for the first time in the conversation. Jackson considered the question with appropriate seriousness. "You would call me whatever feels right to you, James. Your father will always be Richard Sullivan, and I would never try to replace him in your memories or your heart. But I hope, in time, you might come to think of me as a second father, someone who cares about your welfare and your future as deeply as he did." The boy nodded, absorbing this answer with the gravity that characterized his approach to important matters. "Uncle Matthew said you weren't a good man, that you did bad things before coming here." Eleanor started to intervene, but Jackson held up a hand, signaling his willingness to address the accusation directly. "Your uncle is partially right, James. When I was younger, I made choices I'm not proud of. I've spent many years trying to become a better man than I was then. Part of growing up is learning from our mistakes and trying to make amends for them." The straightforward acknowledgement of past errors seemed to impress James more than any defense might have. "Like when I accidentally let the chickens out, and then helped rebuild the kua better than before." Jackson smiled at the child's understanding of redemption through constructive action. "Very much like that, yes." "Will we still have lessons?" Emma asked, her priorities clear. "Of course," Eleanor assured her. "I'll continue teaching all of you, and Mr. Harrison has agreed that the schoolroom will remain an important part of the ranch." Thomas, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. "But what about Papa? Won't he be sad if you marry Mr. Harrison?" The innocent question pierced Eleanor's heart. At 4, Thomas barely remembered his father, except through stories and the few possessions they had managed to keep. His concept of death remained fluid, more like a long absence than a permanent separation. She gathered her youngest onto her lap, choosing her words carefully. "Your papa loved us very much, Thomas. More than anything, he wanted us to be safe and happy. I believe he would be glad to know that Mr. Harrison is taking care of us and that you boys are growing up learning about horses and cattle like he always wanted for you." Thomas considered this explanation, his small face serious with concentration. "So Papa would say it's okay?" "I believe he would," Eleanor affirmed, smoothing his unruly hair. "Because good fathers want what's best for their children, even when they can't be there themselves." The discussion continued as each child processed the news in their own way. Emma was immediately enthusiastic, already planning what she would wear for the ceremony. Thomas accepted the change with the adaptability of very young children, his main concern being whether he could have cake at the wedding. James remained thoughtful, neither openly embracing nor rejecting the idea, but asking practical questions about how their daily lives might change. As the children were preparing for bed later that evening, James lingered behind, clearly wanting a private word with Jackson. Eleanor tactfully busied herself in another room, giving them space for what she sensed might be an important conversation. "Mr. Harrison," James began formally, "I need to ask you something important." Jackson gave the boy his full attention. "Of course, James. You can ask me anything. My papa taught me that a man takes care of his family no matter what, that it's the most important job a man can have." James's young face was solemn with the weight of his question. "If you marry my mother, will you promise to take care of her and Emma and Thomas, even if something happens to me?" The question revealed volumes about the burden James had placed on his own young shoulders, the responsibility he felt as the man of the family after his father's death, the worry that his mother and siblings' welfare depended on his own ability to protect them. Jackson knelt to meet the boy at eye level, recognizing the moment's significance. "James, I promise to care for your mother and siblings with everything I have, for as long as I live. But I want you to understand something important. That responsibility doesn't fall on your shoulders alone anymore. We'll share it, you and I, each doing our part to protect this family." The boy considered this proposition carefully, like how Mr. Mitchell and his assistant foreman worked together during the cattle drive, each responsible for different parts, but both making sure everything works. "Exactly like that," Jackson confirmed, impressed by the apt analogy. "Partners, each with important responsibilities, but neither carrying the whole burden alone." Something eased in James's expression, a tension he had carried for so long that it had become part of his identity. The possibility of shared responsibility, of having an adult partner in protecting his family, offered relief from a weight no 10-year-old should have had to bear. "Then I think it would be okay if you married my mother," he said, with the gravity of someone granting a significant concession. "As long as you remember that she likes wild roses best, and Emma needs someone to listen to her stories even when they're long, and Thomas is afraid of thunderstorms but pretends he isn't." Jackson solemnly committed these family insights to memory, recognizing them as the precious gifts they were, James's way of sharing the caretaking knowledge he had accumulated during his premature tenure as family protector. Later, when Eleanor found Jackson sitting alone on the veranda, his expression was thoughtful in the moonlight. "James gave his approval," he told her as she joined him. "With conditions, of course." Eleanor smiled, unsurprised. "He takes his responsibilities very seriously." "Too seriously for a 10-year-old, Jackson observed. "He's been carrying the weight of your family's welfare on his shoulders since Richard died. I've tried to ease that burden, but—" Eleanor sighed. He's so much like his father, determined to protect everyone, convinced it's his duty alone. Jackson took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. Perhaps what he needs most is to see that strength can be found in partnership, not just in solitary endurance. That sharing burdens doesn't diminish one's importance, but multiplies the family's resilience. As they sat together watching stars emerge above the Arizona landscape, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the desperate mother who had climbed onto an auction block to the woman now planning a future built on choice rather than necessity. From children traumatized by loss and insecurity to young people beginning to flourish in an environment of stability and opportunity. The Diamondback had offered them sanctuary when they needed it most. Now it was becoming something far more precious, a true home where past wounds could heal and new dreams could take root. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whether from Matthew Sullivan's continued interference, Victor Whitaker's territorial ambitions, or the natural complications of blending lives long accustomed to independence, they would face them together as a family bound by choice as much as circumstance. "So," Jackson said, breaking their companionable silence, "a November wedding?" Eleanor nodded, smiling at the simple practicality of his question after the emotional complexities they had navigated. November would be perfect, after the fall roundup, but before winter sets in. Mrs. Abernathy will be insufferable with excitement, he predicted with mock gravity. "She's been planning this since your second week here." "Has she indeed?" Eleanor laughed, remembering the housekeeper's not-so-subtle hints and matchmaking efforts. "And here, I thought we were being so circumspect." "My dear Eleanor," Jackson said with a warmth that made her heart lighten, "the only people who didn't know we were falling in love were probably you and me." B.U.D. As night deepened around the Diamondback Ranch, the lights of the main house glowed with welcome. No longer just a structure of wood and stone, but a true home, sheltering a family created through courage, choice, and the remarkable resilience of the human heart. From the ashes of desperation had risen something beautiful and enduring, the promise of a future far brighter than any of them could have imagined during those dark days when a desperate mother had climbed onto an auction block, risking everything for the children she loved. November arrived with unexpected warmth, as if the Arizona Territory had decided to offer a final reprieve before winter's chill. The wedding preparations transformed the Diamondback Ranch into a hive of activity. Ranch hands constructed a wooden arbor for the ceremony using timber from the property's northern pine groves. Their wives and daughters gathered desert wildflowers that had sprung up after an unseasonable rain, pressing them for decorations. Even the children contributed, with Emma directing the creation of paper garlands to hang from the rafters of the ranch's great room. Eleanor watched these preparations with a mixture of joy and quiet amazement. Her last wedding had been a simple affair at her parents' Ohio farmhouse, with only family and a few neighbors in attendance. This celebration had taken on the character of a community event, with everyone at the Diamondback claiming some role in its execution. "They're not doing this just for me, are they?" she asked Mrs. Abernathy one afternoon as they reviewed the wedding menu. "It seems like so much effort for everyone to expend." The housekeeper looked up from her list of ingredients with a knowing smile. "They're doing it for themselves as much as for you and Mr. Harrison. This ranch has needed a proper mistress for years, someone to make it more than just a successful business. The Hands and their families feel it too. They want to belong to something more meaningful than just a place of employment." Eleanor considered this perspective thoughtfully. She had been so focused on what the Diamondback offered her family that she hadn't fully recognized what she brought to the ranch in return. Not just efficient household management or educational opportunities for the children, but a sense of community and belonging that had been missing before. "Mrs. Sullivan!" Emma burst into the kitchen, her face flushed with excitement. "Mr. Mitchell's wife finished your dress. She wants you to try it for the final fitting." The wedding dress had been another community project, having no fine clothes. Suitable for a bride, Eleanor had initially planned to wear her best Sunday dress, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days. But Sarah Mitchell, the foreman's wife, who had once worked as a seamstress in San Francisco, had other ideas. Using fabric ordered from Phoenix and lace, contributed by 3 different ranch wives who had saved precious scraps from their own wedding gowns, she had created a dress that brought tears to Eleanor's eyes when she first saw it. Now, as she stood in the Mitchells' cabin for the final fitting, Eleanor hardly recognized her reflection in the polished mirror that had been brought out for the occasion. The dress was a warm ivory rather than stark white, acknowledging her status as a widow, while still celebrating the new beginning the marriage represented. Its lines were simple but elegant, with lace at the collar and cuffs that softened its practical silhouette. "You look beautiful, Mama," Emma whispered, her eyes wide with admiration. "Indeed you do, Mrs. Sullivan," Sarah Mitchell agreed, making a final adjustment to the hem. "Mr. Harrison won't know what hit him." Eleanor smiled at their approval, but her thoughts drifted to the changes of the past weeks, not just the wedding preparations, but deeper transformations occurring within her blended family-to-be. James had gradually shifted from wary acceptance of Jackson to something approaching genuine regard, particularly after the rancher had started teaching him more advanced riding skills and including him in discussions about horse breeding. Emma had already embraced Jackson completely, thriving under his attentive interest in her stories and drawings. Even Thomas, who had struggled most with understanding how Jackson would fit into their family structure, had begun following the rancher around the property, peppering him with endless questions that Jackson answered with patient detail. These evolving relationships represented something Eleanor had scarcely dared hope for when she'd first brought her children to the Diamondback. Not merely physical safety and material comfort, but emotional healing and the reconstruction of their sense of family. The resilience children could display, given the right environment and gentle guidance, never ceased to amaze her. 3 days before the wedding, Eleanor was reviewing lesson plans for the following week. She had insisted that the children's education continue without interruption, despite the upcoming celebration. When Jackson appeared at the schoolroom door, his expression uncharacteristically tense. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "could you join me in the study? There's a matter we need to discuss." Something in his tone raised immediate concern. Eleanor organized her papers, asked James to help the younger children with their reading practice, and followed Jackson to his study with a growing sense of unease. Inside, she found not just Jackson, but also Judge Hollister, who had ridden out from Cedar Creek for what Eleanor had assumed was wedding-related business. The judge's solemn expression did nothing to alleviate her concern. "What's happened?" she asked directly, closing the door behind her. Jackson gestured for her to sit, remaining standing himself in a posture that suggested he was bracing for conflict. "Your brother-in-law has filed a legal petition to challenge my adoption of the children." The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. "On what grounds?" "He claims that as Richard's brother, he has prior right to guardianship of the children," Judge Hollister explained, his weathered face sympathetic but his tone professional. "He further alleges that your contract of indenture was signed under duress and is therefore invalid, meaning your current residence at the Diamondback is technically illegal." Eleanor's mind raced with implications and counter-arguments. "That's absurd." Matthew showed no interest in taking all 3 children when Richard died. He only wanted the boys, and he explicitly rejected any responsibility for Emma. "Unfortunately," the judge continued, "the territorial courts tend to favor blood relations in guardianship cases, particularly male relatives when the children include boys. The fact that Mr. Sullivan is now willing to take all 3 children strengthens his position considerably. But our marriage, Eleanor began. Will help, Jackson interjected, but may not be sufficient given the timing. Matthew is arguing that our marriage is a hastily arranged attempt to circumvent his rights as next of kin, rather than a genuine relationship. Eleanor felt a cold dread settling in her stomach. After everything they had endured, the poverty, the auction, rebuilding their lives at the Diamondback, could Matthew still tear her family apart through legal maneuvering? "What can we do?" she asked, forcing her voice to remain steady despite the fear threatening to overwhelm her. Judge Hollister leaned forward, his expression becoming more personal than judicial. "There are several approaches we might take. First, we can challenge Mr. Sullivan's claim of prior interest by documenting his initial refusal to take Emma. Second, we can present evidence of the children's integration and welfare at the Diamondback. Third, and perhaps most importantly, we can demonstrate that your relationship with Mr. Harrison is genuine and not merely a legal convenience." "The wedding," Eleanor began, "should proceed as planned," the judge confirmed, "but we'll need more than just the ceremony to convince the territorial court. We need to show that this union was developing naturally over time, not hastily arranged in response to Mr. Sullivan's claim." Jackson finally sat down beside Eleanor, taking her hand in a gesture of support that felt like an anchor in the storm of uncertainty. "Judge Hollister has suggested gathering statements from those who have observed our relationship developing over the past months. Mrs. Abernathy, the Mitchells, others who can testify to the genuine nature of our connection." "Damn the children," Eleanor added firmly. "James is old enough to have his preferences considered by the court, and even Emma could testify to her desire to remain with us." The judge nodded approvingly. "Children's testimonies can be powerful, particularly from the older boy. If he expresses a clear preference for remaining with you and Mr. Harrison, that will carry significant weight." As they discussed legal strategies and timelines, a part of Eleanor's mind remained fixed on the cruelty of Matthew's timing, waiting until just before the wedding to file his petition, maximizing the disruption to their lives and potentially tainting what should have been a joyful occasion with legal anxiety. "There's one more thing," Jackson said after Judge Hollister had departed with promises to begin preparing their case immediately. "Matthew isn't acting alone in this. I believe Victor Whitaker is involved." Eleanor frowned, making the connection. Instantly. "You think Whitaker is using Matthew to pressure you, just as he's using water rights to pressure the smaller ranchers?" Jackson nodded grimly. "Whitaker was in Phoenix the same week Matthew filed his petition. It's too coincidental, especially given the legal expenses involved. Matthew couldn't afford this kind of legal challenge on his own." "But why?" Eleanor asked, struggling to understand. "What does Whitaker gain from disrupting our family?" "Leverage," Jackson explained. "If he controls something I value, he can force concessions regarding the eastern water rights, or even pressure me to sell portions of the Diamondback at below market rates." The cold calculation behind such a strategy, using children as pawns in a business dispute, filled Eleanor with a burning anger that momentarily displaced her fear. "He's underestimated who he's dealing with if he thinks we'll surrender without a fight." Jackson's expression softened with pride at her fierce response. "That's precisely what I told Judge Hollister. Whatever resources Whitaker brings to this battle, he can't match the determination of a mother protecting her children, or a man defending the family he's chosen." That evening, after the children were asleep, Eleanor and Jackson sat on the veranda discussing how to proceed. The night air carried the scent of distant rain, a promise of renewal that seemed at odds with the threat hanging over their future. "Should we tell the children?" Eleanor asked, watching lightning flicker on the far horizon. "James, at least, is old enough to understand what's happening." Jackson considered the question carefully. I think we should, yes, not to burden them, but because they deserve to know what they might face. James, especially. He needs to understand that his testimony could be crucial. I'm worried about how this will affect him, Eleanor admitted. He's just beginning to feel secure again, to trust that our situation here is stable. Learning that Matthew is trying to separate us could reawaken all his old fears. It might, Jackson acknowledged, but it could also give him an opportunity to take action, to have a voice in determining his own future. That kind of agency can be powerfully healing for a child who's felt helpless in the face of adult decisions. Eleanor recognized the wisdom in his approach. Too often, adults tried to protect children by excluding them from difficult realities, only to leave them feeling more vulnerable when those realities inevitably intruded. Better to arm them with knowledge and support than to let them be blindsided by circumstances they didn't understand. We'll tell them tomorrow, she decided, after lessons but before dinner. That will give them time to process the information with us before bed. The children's reactions to learning of Matthew's legal challenge reflected their distinct personalities. Emma responded with indignant loyalty, declaring that she would never, ever live with Uncle Matthew because he doesn't even like my drawings. Thomas, still too young to fully grasp the legal complexities, simply asked if this meant they would have to leave the horses behind, his primary concern being separation from his beloved pony. James, however, received the news with a quiet intensity that worried Eleanor more than any outburst would have. His young face settled into the too adult expression she had seen during their hardest times after Richard's death, a mask of controlled emotion that no child should need to wear. Uncle Matthew can't make us go with him, he stated with flat certainty. I won't go. Judge Hollister believes your opinion will matter to the court, Jackson told him carefully, but I want you to understand that this will involve answering questions from lawyers and possibly a judge. It won't be easy. James nodded, his jaw set with determination. I can do it. I'll tell them that we belong here now, with you and Mama, that we're a family. The simple declaration brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. Despite all her concerns about how James was processing the potential adoption, he had already come to his own conclusion about where and with whom they belonged. Later that night, after the younger children had gone to bed, James appeared at the study door, where Eleanor and Jackson were reviewing documents Judge Hollister had left for their consideration. Can I ask something? He said, his serious demeanor making him seem older than his 10 years. Of course, Jackson replied, setting aside the papers immediately. James entered the room with measured steps, stopping before Jackson's desk with the bearing of someone about to conduct important business. If Uncle Matthew takes us to California, what happens to you and the ranch? The question revealed a dimension of concern neither adult had anticipated. James wasn't just worried about his own fate, but about the impact of Matthew's actions on Jackson and the Diamondback. The ranch would continue, Jackson assured him, but it wouldn't be the same without you and your mother and siblings. A house needs a family to make it a home. James nodded, absorbing this answer with characteristic thoughtfulness. And the wedding? Will it still happen even if Uncle Matthew wins? Eleanor moved to stand beside her son, recognizing the deeper fear beneath his practical questions. Yes, James, Mr. Harrison and I will marry regardless of what happens with Matthew's petition. Our commitment to each other isn't dependent on legal outcomes. And you'd still try to get us back? The vulnerability in the question broke Eleanor's heart. With every resource at my disposal, Jackson promised, his voice carrying the absolute certainty that had made him successful in building the Diamondback against considerable odds. I don't give up on what matters, James, and nothing matters more to me than this family we're building together. The boy seemed satisfied with this answer, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Then we'll fight too. I'll talk to the judge and tell him that Uncle Matthew doesn't really care about us. He just wants to hurt you because you're successful and he isn't." The perceptiveness of this assessment, recognizing the jealousy that had always motivated Matthew's actions toward his brother's family, stunned both adults into momentary silence. "You're very observant," Jackson said finally, with the respect one would accord a peer rather than a child. "That understanding will serve you well when you speak to the judge." As James left to return to his room, Eleanor remained beside Jackson's desk, troubled by the weight her eldest child had taken upon his young shoulders yet again. He shouldn't have to fight these battles. He's just a boy. "A remarkable boy," Jackson corrected gently, "who's learning that having a voice matters, that fighting for what you love isn't futile even when the odds seem stacked against you. These aren't easy lessons, but they're valuable ones that will serve him throughout his life." The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to the Diamondback. Eleanor was supervising the children's morning chores when Mrs. Abernathy appeared at the barn door, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Mrs. Sullivan, there's a lady asking to see you. Says her name is Victoria Whitaker." Eleanor exchanged a startled glance with Jackson, who had been showing James how to properly saddle a horse. "Whitaker? As in Victor Whitaker's wife?" "Yes," Mrs. Abernathy confirmed with a meaningful look. Curiosity overriding caution, Eleanor followed the housekeeper back to the main house, where she found an elegantly dressed woman waiting in the parlor. Victoria Whitaker was perhaps 40, with carefully styled dark hair and the kind of refined beauty that came from excellent breeding and meticulous self-maintenance. Her traveling outfit, though practical for the territorial dust, had clearly been made by an expensive dressmaker, and the simple brooch at her throat contained a diamond large enough to purchase a small homestead. "Mrs. Sullivan," she said, rising as Eleanor entered, "thank you for seeing me. I apologize for arriving unannounced." "Mrs. Whitaker," Eleanor acknowledged with polite restraint, "this is an unexpected visit." The woman's smile held a hint of wry understanding. "I imagine it is, particularly given recent legal developments. May we speak privately?" Eleanor hesitated, wary of the woman's intentions, yet intrigued by her apparent willingness to acknowledge the elephant in the room. "Of course. Would you care for tea?" Once they were settled with cups of Mrs. Abernathy's strong tea, Victoria Whitaker came directly to the point. "I'm here about my husband's involvement with your brother-in-law's petition. I want you to know that I do not support Victor's actions in this matter." The frank admission caught Eleanor off guard. "I appreciate your candor, Mrs. Whitaker, but I'm not sure what you expect me to do with this information." "Nothing directly," Victoria replied. "I simply thought you deserved to know that the attempt to separate you from your children isn't supported by everyone in the Whitaker household." She paused, taking a deliberate sip of tea before continuing. "I also wanted to warn you that Victor won't stop with legal maneuvering. He's determined to acquire at least the eastern portion of the Diamondback, and he views your children as leverage against Mr. Harrison." Eleanor felt a chill despite the warm parlor. "Why are you telling me this? Surely such a disclosure goes against your husband's interests." Victoria's perfectly composed expression revealed a flash of something, ardor, more determined than her elegant appearance suggested. "I have my reasons, Mrs. Sullivan. Let's just say that I recognize the value of mothers protecting their children, even when doing so requires opposing powerful men." The cryptic statement hinted at personal experience that Eleanor could only guess at, but the sincerity behind it seemed genuine. "Do you have children of your own, Mrs. Whitaker?" A shadow passed across the woman's face. "I had a daughter. She died of fever 3 years ago, despite having the best doctor's money could bring from San Francisco." Her voice remained controlled, but her hands tightened almost imperceptibly around her teacup. She was 8, the same age as your Emma, I believe. The shared experience of motherhood, including its deepest grief, created a momentary bridge between the two women that transcended their husbands' business conflicts. "I'm very sorry for your loss." Victoria acknowledged the sympathy with a slight nod. "My husband's business ambitions have intensified since Sophia's death. He focuses on expansion to avoid confronting his grief. A common enough male response to loss, though not a particularly healthy one." The insight into Victor Whitaker's motivations added a dimension of human complexity to what Eleanor had previously viewed as simple greed or business rivalry. That doesn't excuse his willingness to use children as pawns. "No, it doesn't," Victoria agreed firmly, "which is why I'm here. I can't stop Victor's business strategies directly, but I can provide you with information that might help protect your family." She reached into her small handbag and withdrew a folded document. "This is a copy of the agreement between Victor and Matthew Sullivan. It details the financial arrangements supporting the guardianship petition, including provisions that would give Victor control over any portions of your children's inheritance from their father." Eleanor accepted the document with surprise. Why would Matthew agree to such terms? "Because he's desperate and short-sighted," Victoria stated flatly. "His farm in California is failing, and Victor offered him a way out of his financial troubles in exchange for cooperation. I doubt your brother-in-law fully understood what he was signing." As Eleanor scanned the document, recognizing its potential value in challenging Matthew's petition, she couldn't help wondering about Victoria's motives. "Mrs. Whitaker, while I'm grateful for this information, I have to ask, why risk your husband's anger by interfering in his business?" Victoria's smile contained a sharp edge of private satisfaction. "My marriage to Victor is based on mutual advantage rather than affection, Mrs. Sullivan. He gained social connections in San Francisco that his new money couldn't buy. I gained financial security after my father's investments collapsed. It's a pragmatic arrangement that works because we each maintain certain freedoms within its boundaries." The frank assessment of her marriage, devoid of romantic illusions, yet not without a kind of clear-eyed respect, struck Eleanor as both sad and somehow admirable in its honesty. "And opposing his tactics regarding our children falls within those boundaries. My husband may control his business empire, Mrs. Sullivan, but I maintain authority over matters of social conscience. Attempting to separate children from a loving mother crosses a line I cannot ignore, particularly given my own loss." Victoria set down her teacup with precise movements. "Use the document as you see fit. Judge Hollister is a fair man who recognizes the difference between genuine family concern and financially motivated opportunism." As Victoria prepared to leave, she paused at the parlor door, her expression softening slightly. "Your wedding is in 2 days, I believe. Despite these complications, I hope it brings you joy. Second chances at happiness are precious and all too rare in this life." The unexpected good wishes from a woman whose husband was actively working against that happiness left Eleanor momentarily speechless. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitaker. I hope you find your own measure of peace as well." Victoria's smile acknowledged the careful phrasing that avoided direct reference to her marital situation. "We all make our accommodations with life's disappointments, Mrs. Sullivan. The trick is to preserve what matters most to us while doing so." With a rustle of expensive fabric, she was gone, leaving Eleanor with a powerful document and an equally powerful reminder that allies could emerge from unexpected quarters. The document Victoria provided proved invaluable when Judge Hollister presented their case to the territorial court the following day. The financial arrangement between Victor Whitaker and Matthew Sullivan effectively undermined Matthew's claim of acting out of family concern, exposing his petition as a business transaction rather than a genuine attempt to provide for his brother's children. With the legal threat diminished, though not entirely eliminated, the wedding proceeded as planned, transforming the Diamondback Ranch into a celebration of resilience as much as romance. The ceremony itself was simple but deeply meaningful, with James standing proudly beside Jackson as his official witness and Emma scattering wildflower petals before her mother with solemn delight. Thomas, entrusted with carrying the rings-on, a small cushion, performed his duty with uncharacteristic focus, the importance of his role overriding his usual exuberance. As Eleanor and Jackson exchanged vows beneath the wooden arbor ranch hands had constructed, she was struck by the journey that had brought them to this moment, from desperate widow and successful rancher to partners creating a blended family against considerable odds. The traditional words, for better or worse, in sickness and in health, carried deeper meaning for those who had already experienced life's harshest challenges and emerged stronger for having faced them together. The celebration afterward echoed the community spirit that had characterized the wedding preparations. Ranch hands and their families shared a feast prepared under Mrs. Abernathy's exacting direction. Music from fiddles and guitars filled the autumn air as couples danced on a wooden platform constructed specially for the occasion. Children played games organized by the older girls, their laughter a counterpoint to the more sedate adult conversations. As twilight deepened into evening, Eleanor found herself momentarily alone on the veranda, watching the celebrations continue by lantern light. The cool night air carried the scent of juniper and sage, mingling with the more domestic aromas of food and wood smoke from the ranch's fires. Jackson smiled at her decisive response, still occasionally surprised by how completely she had embraced the role of ranch partner rather than merely household manager. "I'll ride into Cedar Creek today to speak with Caldwell. The less attention we draw to our interest, the better our chances of completing the purchase without interference." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of James, already dressed for ranch work despite the early hour. At 11, he had shot up several inches over the winter, losing some of his childish roundness as he grew into a lanky pre-adolescence that hinted at the man he would become. Victoria's carefully composed expression revealed a flicker of surprise at Eleanor's direct approach, quickly replaced by the social mask that wealthy women learned to maintain in public settings. "Mrs. Harrison, my congratulations on your marriage. It seems to have brought you happiness." "It has, indeed," Eleanor confirmed, noting Victoria's use of her married name as a small acknowledgement of the union's legitimacy. "My children have thrived at the Diamondback, which has been my greatest joy." Something softened briefly in Victoria's. Perfect composure, the shared understanding between mothers that transcended social boundaries and business conflicts. Children's well-being is what matters most, isn't it? Everything else is ultimately secondary. The comment contained echoes of their previous conversation about Victoria's deceased daughter, creating an opening Eleanor carefully expanded. "I've often thought of your Sophia since we spoke. The flowers are blooming on the ranch now. I imagine she would have loved them at this age." The personal reference might have been considered an overreach in normal social circumstances, but Eleanor had calculated that Victoria's isolation might make her receptive to genuine human connection, even from the wife of her husband's business rival. The risk paid off. Victoria's carefully maintained facade cracked slightly, revealing genuine emotion beneath. She loved wildflowers. Victor could never understand why she preferred them to the hothouse roses he imported at ridiculous expense, but children see beauty where adults often miss it. This glimpse of Victor Whittaker through his wife's eyes added another dimension to Eleanor's understanding of their adversary. A man who expressed affection through grand gestures rather than attentive understanding, who perhaps applied the same approach to his marriage as to his business dealings. "Mrs. Whittaker," Eleanor said quietly, moving slightly away from potential eavesdroppers, "I wonder if we might correspond occasionally. Women in our position, managing households far from town with significant responsibilities, have few opportunities for meaningful conversation. I've found letters can provide valuable connection even between busy lives." The invitation was carefully crafted to offer genuine friendship while maintaining plausible deniability about any strategic purpose. Victoria studied Eleanor's face for a moment, her sophisticated understanding of social maneuvering evident in her thoughtful assessment. "I would welcome such correspondence," she finally agreed. "Though I should mention that my husband's current under projects, Lucy, might make such a connection awkward." "Husbands have their business concerns," Eleanor replied with deliberate lightness. "We needn't allow those to dictate our personal associations entirely. I've found that women often find practical solutions where men see only competition and conflict." Victoria's smile held a hint of genuine warmth for the first time. "Indeed they do, Mrs. Harrison. Indeed they do." As the Harrison family departed Cedar Creek later that afternoon, Eleanor felt cautiously optimistic about the small bridge she had established with Victoria Whittaker. Whether it would ultimately prove useful in resolving the water rights dispute remained uncertain, but creating connections rather than deepening divisions seemed the wiser long-term strategy for securing the Diamondbacks' future. "Successful expedition?" Jackson asked quietly as they drove homeward, the children drowsing in the back of the wagon after the excitement of town and socializing. Eleanor smiled, appreciating his perception of her church attendance as more than merely religious observation. "Promising," she confirmed. "Mrs. Whittaker seems receptive to correspondence despite her husband's business tactics. There's definite strain in that marriage. She attended church alone and referred to his projects with noticeable distance." "Potentially useful," Jackson acknowledged, "though we should proceed carefully. Whittaker wouldn't hesitate to use any perceived manipulation of his wife against us." "It's not manipulation if the friendship is genuine," Eleanor pointed out, "and I believe it could be. Victoria Whittaker is an intelligent woman in an isolated position. Real connection might benefit us both, regardless of our husbands' conflicts." As the wagon crested the final hill before the Diamondback came into view, Eleanor felt a surge of protectiveness for the home they had built together. The ranch spread before them in the afternoon light, cattle grazing on green pastures, ranch hands moving purposefully between outbuildings, smoke rising from the cookhouse chimney as dinner preparations began. Beyond the immediate ranch yard, she could see the schoolhouse where children from the Diamondback and neighboring properties gathered daily for lessons, and the new orchard they had planted that would bear fruit for future generations. This place represented not just financial security, but the realization of deeper values: community, education, opportunity for those who worked honestly, refuge for those who needed second chances. From the desperate gamble of the auction block had emerged not just personal salvation, but the creation of something larger and more enduring than Eleanor had dared imagine during those dark days after Richard's death. Whatever challenges Victor Whittaker might present, through water rights disputes, legal maneuverings, or other tactics yet to emerge, the Diamondback stood on a foundation stronger than any one adversary could undermine. That foundation lay not in property boundaries or legal documents, but in the resilient human connections Eleanor and Jackson had fostered, with each other, with the children, with their employees and neighbors, and perhaps even with unexpected allies like Victoria Whittaker. "We'll find a way through this," Eleanor said with quiet certainty as the wagon began its descent toward home. "Not just for ourselves, but for everyone who depends on the Diamondback." Jackson's hand covered hers briefly, a gesture of partnership more meaningful than elaborate declarations. "Together," he agreed simply. "That's how we'll face whatever comes next." As evening settled over the ranch, Eleanor watched her children helping with final chores, James confidently leading a horse to the stable, Emma gathering eggs with careful pride, Thomas solemnly carrying firewood in his small arms. Their transformation from the hungry, fearful children who had arrived at the Diamondback seemed nothing short of miraculous, a testament to children's natural resilience when given security, purpose, and love. Her own transformation had been equally profound, from desperate widow to confident ranch partner, from a woman with no options to one making strategic decisions affecting many lives. The auction block that had seemed the ultimate humiliation had instead become the first step toward unexpected strength and fulfillment, proving that even life's darkest moments could lead to new beginnings if one found the courage to take that first desperate step forward. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, water rights disputes, legal battles, or personal conflicts, Eleanor would face them with the hard-won knowledge that had carried her from auction block to this moment. True strength came not from avoiding life's hardships, but from facing them with determination and hope, discovering unexpected resilience in the process of overcoming what once seemed insurmountable. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.